Imagine riding the school bus, a place that feels so safe and familiar, surrounded by friends with the usual chatter filling the air. But then, something happens. A strange figure appears, an eerie silence falls, or an unexplainable sound emerges. Suddenly, the ordinary school bus ride becomes a nightmare you can't escape. Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. In today's episode, we're exploring 5 true encounters on school buses that turned terrifying in the blink of an eye. From ghostly passengers to chilling sightings, these stories reveal that even the most ordinary routines can sometimes lead us straight into the unknown. Story 1. The Phantom Passenger. I was 15 when this happened, and I'll never forget it. It was a gloomy November morning in Salem, Massachusetts, and the fog was so thick it felt like the whole town was underwater. I took the school bus as usual, hopping on near the end of the route, so the bus was almost full by the time I climbed the steps. I took my usual seat near the middle, earbuds in, ready to drown out the morning chatter. But that day was different. Our driver, Mrs. Willow, was a tough, no-nonsense lady who had been driving us for years. That morning, though, her expression seemed off. She kept glancing in the rearview mirror, her face pale and tense. I figured she was just having a rough day, but then I noticed she wasn't looking at the road. She was looking at something in the back of the bus. Curious, I turned to see what had caught her attention. There, at the very back of the bus, sat a girl I didn't recognize. She was dressed in clothes that looked old-fashioned, like something out of a history book. A plain dress with long sleeves and a high collar. Her long hair hung over her face, and she was staring straight ahead, motionless. I remember thinking it was strange because, in a small town like Salem, I knew most of the kids in my school, but I figured maybe she was a new student. Still, there was something off about her. None of the other kids seemed to notice her. I nudged my friend Jamie sitting next to me and whispered, "Do you know her?" Jamie shrugged, barely glancing back. The bus continued its route, and Mrs. Willow kept checking the mirror, her hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel. When we finally got to school, she called out that everyone needed to get off, but nobody moved. We were all waiting for the strange girl to leave first. I turned around, expecting to see her standing up or moving down the aisle, but she was gone. She had vanished as if she'd never been there. I looked at Jamie wide-eyed, but he just laughed, thinking I was pulling his leg. It wasn't until later that I told my mom about what happened. Her face went pale, and she told me about a girl named Emily who had died in a bus accident on that same route decades ago. She was rumored to appear on foggy mornings, sitting silently at the back of the bus. Since that day, I never sat in the back of the bus again, and every time I ride on foggy mornings, I feel a chill down my spine, half expecting to see that ghostly figure once more. Story 2. The Midnight Ride. I was 16 and this happened in Kyoto, Japan, after a late school festival rehearsal. My friend Aiko and I were the last ones left, so we took the late bus home. The city was eerily quiet, and the streetlights gave everything a dim, ghostly glow. It was just us and the driver, the bus moving slowly through the deserted streets. About halfway home, the bus suddenly stopped, jolting us out of our drowsiness. The driver got out, muttering about a problem with the engine. Aiko and I exchanged nervous glances. It felt weird being alone in the middle of nowhere, with nothing around but dark, empty fields and a thick, rolling fog. We waited, listening to the silence. Then, faintly at first, we heard a tapping sound from the back of the bus. Aiko's eyes went wide and I froze. We both turned to look, expecting to see maybe another passenger who had been asleep, but there was no one there. The tapping continued, growing louder, more insistent. It sounded like footsteps, slow and steady, coming closer, moving from seat to seat. I could feel my heartbeat pounding in my ears, my breath catching as the sound moved toward us. Then out of the corner of my eye, I saw something, a shadow passing along the windows at the back, like someone was walking outside the bus, circling it. Aiko grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin, her face pale with fear. The driver finally returned, mumbling something about the bus being fine now, but he noticed our terrified expressions. "Did you hear it?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. We nodded, and he didn't say another word. We rode in silence the rest of the way. The only sound, the hum of the engine and the occasional creak of the bus. When we got off, I felt like I'd just escaped something sinister, something I couldn't explain. To this day, I still have no idea what we heard that night, but every time I take the bus late at night, I can't shake the feeling that someone or something is still out there, waiting to make itself known. Story 3, The Silent Man. As a 12-year-old, riding the same school bus every day in Durban, South Africa, was routine. I never gave it a second thought. Mr. K, our driver, was a friendly figure who knew all the kids by name. But one morning, as we drove along the familiar route, I noticed something unsettling. Mr. K was unusually quiet, his gaze fixed on the road ahead, his expression tense. About halfway through our journey, I spotted a man standing at the roadside, just past a bus stop. He was dressed in a long black coat, and his wide-brimmed hat cast a shadow over his face. Something about his posture sent shivers down my spine. His body was rigid, almost unnatural, and he watched the bus as we approached. For the next week, this man appeared at the same spot, moving closer each day, his presence becoming a fixture on our route. I began to feel a sense of dread every time we passed that place. My friends and I whispered nervously, speculating about who he was and why he was there, but no one had an answer. On the 5th day, he stood right at the edge of the road, inches away as we passed. I could see his face now, twisted and distorted, his eyes locked onto ours. As we drove past, I heard a loud thud on the roof of the bus. It echoed ominously, like something or someone was crawling on top. Fear engulfed us. We were too terrified to scream, too scared to even look up. Mr. K glanced in the rearview mirror, his eyes wide with disbelief. When we finally arrived at school, the air was thick with anxiety. None of us spoke about what had happened, but we all felt it, an unspoken bond forged in fear. Weeks later, I learned that a man had gone missing in our area years ago, last seen near the same bus stop. His spirit was said to haunt the route, searching for something he could never find. To this day, I avoid that bus stop, haunted by the lingering fear that the silent man might still be waiting for us. Story 4, The Final Farewell. It was a warm evening in Phoenix when my bus ride home turned into a nightmare. As we cruised down the highway, the bus began to shake. The driver, Mrs. Collins, struggled to maintain control, and the passengers began to murmur in confusion. Suddenly, the bus jolted violently, and we heard a loud thud from the back. "What was that?" I exclaimed. But before anyone could answer, a heavy mist rolled in from nowhere, enveloping the bus. Visibility dropped to nearly zero, and I could hear the panicked breaths of my classmates. Mrs. Collins turned around, her face ghostly white. "Stay calm, everyone. I'm going to pull over." As she did, a soft voice floated through the mist saying, "Help me, please." My heart raced as I strained to see through the fog. The mist cleared just enough to reveal a girl standing at the back of the bus, her eyes filled with tears. "Help me," she repeated, her voice breaking. Before anyone could react, she vanished, leaving us all in stunned silence. The bus erupted in chaos, everyone screaming. Mrs. Collins quickly drove us to safety, her hands shaking on the wheel. When I got home, I learned that a girl had died on that stretch of road years ago after being thrown from a car in a terrible accident. Her spirit, it seemed, still seeks help, forever trapped in that fog. Story 5, The Haunted Route. As a high school student in New York City, riding the bus was part of my daily routine. But one afternoon changed everything for me. It was rush hour and the bus was packed. I settled into my usual seat, but the atmosphere felt different, heavy and tense, as if something ominous lurked just outside. As we traveled down a particularly dark stretch of road, the bus jolted to a stop. Mr. Carter, our driver, leaned forward, his face pale. "Everyone stay seated. There's something on the road ahead," he said, his voice quivering. I looked out the window and saw a figure, a man in tattered clothes, frantically waving his arms. My heart raced. I felt a mix of concern and dread. As the driver reached for the door handle, chaos erupted behind me. "Don't open the door! He's dangerous!" shouted a voice. Panic washed over us like a cold wave. Mr. Carter hesitated, his brow furrowed in uncertainty. Just then, as quickly as he had appeared, the figure vanished into thin air. "What just happened?" Mr. Carter muttered, disbelief etched on his face. We exchanged uneasy glances, our imaginations racing. Once we arrived at school, I learned a chilling truth. A homeless man had been killed on that very road years ago, struck by a car while seeking help. Locals whispered that his spirit still wandered, desperately looking for someone to lend a hand. From that day on, every time I rode that bus, I felt a weight in the air, a lingering presence that reminded me of the past. It was a haunting lesson about the thin veil between life and death, and the stories that remain trapped in the shadows of our everyday lives. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more creepy stories. Which of these stories gave you a chilling experience? Let us know. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and remember, sometimes the scariest stories are the ones that are real.